was so attached to the success of the product, the launch of the product, that when it canceled, I was heartbroken. And I really had to do some soul searching. Like, wow, this really impacted me, right? And I think there were a few lessons there for me. One was, you know, who you are does not equal the things that you are outputting.
Guys, today we talked to Kayiita Johnson. We are so lucky. Kayiita is incredibly smart and helped build products that we either use day to day or definitely recognize. He's a product manager at Cruise, a self-driving car company where he's working on the Origin vehicle, which comes out in 2023 in San Francisco. Big deal. He's also been a product manager at Google, where he worked on Google Nest Hub, is a Stanford MBA holder, and an engineer from Minnesota. So Kayiita started PM While Black to lay the blueprint for how to get into product management, as well as Black Surfers, which he's grown into the largest community of Black surfers and won multiple awards for. So today we learned from Kayiita how to make the most of your MBA experience, how to get into product management, and how to get into surfing. We also have a fun conversation. Here's Kayiita. Kayiita, I'm so glad to have you on. I actually want to dive right in with you because you've got a really cool story and I want us to just get into it. I think there's lots that folks can learn from you here today. I'd love to start from the beginning. You've had an interest in engineering from a young age and would love you to tell me about what set off that spark for you.
Yeah, I appreciate the question because I think it's super interesting to see how people chose that initial passion versus where they ended up.
Yeah.
So for me, taking a step back, I think with engineering, I think oftentimes, and this is kind of a sad fact of life that hopefully we can change at some point, but I find that with STEM, anything STEM related, you need to have someone in your life that was in STEM. It's very rare that you see someone that came from a community, a family that had nobody in STEM and then go into STEM. And so for me, I was blessed to have a mom who was a nurse and then a father who was a physics professor. And so at the age of like 4 or 5, I was attending lectures at universities, things on like quantum mechanics in the 90s, so
that's awesome.
For me, it was already, it was already going to be a thing. I think at 5 years old, my parents asked me what I wanted to be. I think the first thing I said was astronaut. The next thing was engineer. So I guess it takes two chances. So I think from an early age, I was already kind of angled that way. And then I think it was accentuated because in my neighborhood, I had my former childhood best friend, he got a lot of the computers first. My dad had this like really clunky laptop that he showed me, MS Basic, if you even know what that is. It's like this like super onerous programming language. So I was programming a little bit with him because he had to do it for work. And then my friend had like a bunch of computers. And so we were able to spend like countless hours on the computers, fixing them, writing up programs. And so from an early age, just kind of engrossed in this field. And so for me, actually, was thinking about pursuing computer engineering. But then I switched to electrical. So I can speak a little bit about that as well. But
I love it. Yeah. I resonate. So my dad is a doctor. And so similarly had someone in STEM. But I, on the other hand, wanted to be a singer and then a zoologist. I wanted to rescue all the wild animals and take care of them. So nice. Still might become a zoologist or just taking care of animals later. But yeah. So y'all aren't surprised when that happens. Yes. But yeah, so I ended up doing chemical engineering in undergrad and you did ECE electrical. I would love to hear about how that happened for you.
Yeah. So I ended up doing electrical with a minor in Chinese, but when I was in kind of mid-high school, I was thinking about computer engineering. And I remember learning about the major, I was using our dial-up connection at the time, and I was like, Dad, I think I want to do computer engineering. And so he was like, oh, that's interesting. And at the time, I think it was like, maybe 2004, 2005. And he was like, hey, let's take a walk through the neighborhood. And I was like, oh, okay, sounds good. And he pointed out like a few neighbors and he was like, you know that guy? And I was like, oh yeah. And he's like, yeah, you see him all the time, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, he's like mowing the lawn, he's doing things around the house. And my dad's like, yeah, well, he was a computer engineer and he got laid off
Oh, wow.
And so I was like, oh wow, he did that for like a couple other people. And so I was like, oh, so he was like, yeah, I think electrical could be a better kind of like safe place for you, which actually kind of builds on this theme for myself, which is I tend to be more risk off, but I'm trying to be more
Mm.
risk on in my life. But I think coming from that background of like, hey, kind of play it safe. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do electrical engineering.
And keep my job.
um,
And look at you,
and
you
keep
have
my
a job.
ideally. Figure, knock on wood. 2023 seems like it's going to be tough, challenging, but yeah, that's how I ended up doing electrical. Um, and I stuck
Yeah,
with that through
totally.
the University of Minnesota.
I actually want to talk a little bit before we move forward about this risk off, risk on, because
Hmm.
lots of folks can resonate with that. Sounds like you've in your life made decisions to try to be less risk averse and try to create security. And sounds like that had to do with your dad. Is there any other theme around that that's led you to where you are today?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, yeah, I think generally growing up, so my mom immigrated from Uganda at a young age, maybe like in her teens, and you know, for a lot of immigrants, it tends to be a lot about survival. And when you see your children kind of growing up, you think, I want them to be successful. And kind of feel like you sacrifice so much, you want to make sure that they're successful. And so it's less about do these things that are unknown, and it's more about focusing on the known. And so I'm a big proponent of the nurture and the nature versus nurture uh, argument. And so for me, I was kind of guided from an early age of, hey, think about things that are going to be more of a sure thing. Um, the positives of that is that things that are sure tend to be sure things. If you go to study to be an engineer and you work hard to get good grades, you likely will become an engineer. And so there's kind of like this tried and true path. The problem I see with that is that sometimes that path, that sure thing, may not align with who you really are meant to be, that life purpose. And I've kind of learned that really through others, including this podcast with you. But seeing folks really pursue what they believe to be what their life's purpose is, right? And I actually read a few books that have kind of tipped me in this direction. One is The Alchemist, which if you haven't read
Great
it,
book.
read it. Oh my
Must
gosh,
read.
I
Yeah.
wish I had read it much earlier. Fantastic life lessons in there, as well as Sacred Cows, and they
I
both
haven't
kind of
read that
point to
one.
this idea. Definitely check it out. And they both point to this idea of really following your life's purpose, understanding what gets you going, what makes you passionate, and acknowledging that maybe in the beginning it'll be tough, but if it really is your purpose, you're gonna. That's the hardest you're gonna work when you're focused on your life purpose. That's the longest hours you're gonna work. That's the most excited you're ever gonna be, and so that just naturally will allow you to be successful, whatever that means in that field or area of passion. So it's something that I'm trying to turn to because obviously an MBA is another kind of sure thing.
Yeah.
Not going to Stanford is a sure thing, but getting an MBA generally will lead you to a certain level of success.
Yeah.
But as I turn my attention to self-driving vehicles, which feels like a huge bet, or other endeavors like Black Surfers, I'm really trying to focus on that kind of feeling of, am I truly passionate about this?
Yeah. So I love that you bring that up because I think you have been embodying both of those risk on and risk off in the ventures that you've chosen to pursue. And you just mentioned Black Surfers, PM Wild Black. I think you're really exploring entrepreneurship in a way that feels safe for you. And I think not everyone can afford to just take a huge risk and leap and follow their passions right off the bat. And so this is a great way to maybe dip your toes in and figure it out. I resonate in the sense that I'm an immigrant. I have parents who also grew up outside of the US and live outside of the US. And as an entrepreneur, I've talked about this before on the podcast. It's been really tough trying to get them to understand what I'm doing, and bringing them along in the journey is also something that's been it is a work in progress. It has been really meaningful for me, and getting to follow my passions has been something that's really meaningful. I very much resonate with what you said about you work the most and you really enjoy it to the fullest, but we all have our own paths toward that. So thanks,
Yeah,
thanks for
absolutely.
that, Kaita. Let's talk about your MBA. So you did this ECE degree, and then what spurred you toward the MBA at Stanford? It was a sure path, and anything else?
Yeah. So for me, I had done a few co-ops during undergrad, doing firmware engineering, doing electrical engineering, and I really enjoyed the technical nature of the work. But a con for me is that I felt that I was underutilizing kind of my what I framed at the time as people skills. Because in undergrad, I was super involved in clubs and organizations, being the president of the National Society of Black Engineers, treasurer of the Black Student Union, uh,
Yeah,
leadership in
leader,
other
born to
orgs.
lead.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I'm going to use that with my wife. So, I'm
It's
born to
great.
lead. Yeah. I'm sure that'll go over well. Yeah. So, I think for me, I felt that those roles were kind of underutilizing that skill set. And so I was kind of looking for what that would mean and what that would look like after college.
Mhm.
And at the time, I wasn't aware of product management. And so I went to this career fair and ended up getting an internship at TI, again as a firmware engineering intern. But during the internship, the manager was like, "Hey, you were doing amazing. We would love to hire you on full time as a firmware engineer. But I also see you kind of engaging in these clubs, leading folks. I wonder if some of these leadership rotation programs might be a better fit for you after college." And I'm so thankful. I forget his name now, but so thankful to him for saying that because, again, in my head, I was like, I'm studying to be an engineer to then be an engineer and do the sure thing. And so I spoke to a few mentors, and there was a applications engineering rotation program and then a sales engineering rotation program. And I really liked the apps one because it really had more of a focus on the technical aspect. I could kind of dig into code with other engineers at other customers and companies, kind of do PCB design, etc. The sales one felt further from the technical aspect. You were still technical, but it was much more about the business. And so I talked to a few mentors about it within TI. And one of my mentors said, "Well, you know, I'm not sure what your long term goals are here at TI, but the CEO of TI did the sales rotation program." And I was like, "Well, I obviously want to be the CEO of TI, so I'm going to go do the
Obviously,
sales."
like I said, I was born
Yeah.
to lead. I'm going to tell
There you
Saran
go.
that.
Yeah. So obviously, I chose the sales rotation program, and that was actually a blast. Still friends with a lot of people in the program today. Did marketing, sales, operations, rotations, and from an early age, I always kind of wanted to move to California. My parents probably took us there every few years, and I got to body surf in Huntington Beach, which, looking back, that was
Yes.
a poor decision because that's kind of dangerous. But I was having a blast doing that. So in my head, I just had this idea of palm trees, warm
Yeah.
weather. That's where I need to be. And so I was advocating for myself. I need to go to California. I need to go to California. And the HR leader of the program said, "Hey," one day she said, "Hey, the Eastern area director wants to talk to you." And in my head, I was like, "No, why?" Because I wanted to go to the West. I had done all the, I actually had like angled to do these presentations in front of all the sales offices. I was like, "This is where I'm going." And so I talked to the Eastern area director, and he was like, "Hey, I want to talk to you about this opportunity in New York City. You'd be the only one. You would work with all these hardware startups out there." And, of course, understanding that I want to go to the West, I peppered him with questions. I said, "Well, what's the size of the market? How much have you understood? What kind of revenue is coming out of there? Et cetera. What kind of support would I get?" So I asked him a bunch of these questions because in reality, I wanted to go West. Got off the phone with him. The next day, my HR leader comes to me. She says, "He interviewed 8 people. You're the only one. He wants to talk to the hiring manager." And
Wow.
I was like, "Oh, like, why is that?" She said, "Oh, it's because he believes, like, wow, you just thought you were so analytical about the opportunity.
That's
And
what I was
that's
thinking
exactly
just
what
now.
we need in New York." And I was
You're
like,
like,
"Oh, God."
no.
I'm sure everyone else was like, "New York City, I would love to go."
Right.
Right. So I ended up going. I'd never been to New York City before. I loved it. I had a blast. I met so many people working on so many different types of ideas. It really opened my eyes to like what's possible
Mhm.
um, within the startup realm for hardware, at least. And through that time, what I was really excited about was, hey, I got to work on these really exciting ideas and get into the details of these companies. And the con of that, though, was that I was spread so thin that I would only spend enough time at each company that made sense for TI, right? Because TI is a semiconductor business. My goal as a sales engineer is to sell chips. And so as soon as my time there is returning less of an investment because maybe now it's about the market business plan or long-term strategy or operations, it's kind of like, hey, you should probably move on to the next company. But I felt this yearning, this desire to really stay with one product and kind of go start to finish, idea to launching and thinking about secondary features and the second version, et cetera. At the time, of course, I was in the ecosystem, and so a lot of my friends were founders. And so I remember I went to the bar on the Upper East Side with the founder, and I was like, yeah, this is kind of what I want to do. Like, I want to be involved with everything as part of a product. Like, I want to do the sales, the manufacturing strategy, the design, talking to customers. And so I was like, what do you think I should do? And he was like, well, obviously you should be a founder. And I was like, well, what's like a lower risk version of that?
Right. Coming back to risk off.
Exactly. And he was like, well, I guess, product management. And so I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And when I looked at what it took to become a product manager, it was clear that the fastest way for me to get into that field was to go to business school.
Got it.
And so that's how I ended up.
And so to business school you went. I want to highlight two things in your story that you shared. One, you had a mentor that told you about the rotational program, which really served you. And two, you talked to a founder who helped you come up with the idea of product management as a really important path for you to take. And to me, it's so interesting. I think mentors are very, very important in our lives, just opening our world to ideas and opportunities that we otherwise just wouldn't be aware of. And same with this founder who maybe was your peer mentor, but just the importance of people and talking to people and learning from others and keeping an open mind.
Absolutely.
So love it. So you decided to go to business school. Business school is hard to get in, let alone Stanford, which is one of the hardest business schools to get into. How did you do it? What are concrete things you did that you feel moved the needle for your application?
Yeah, I would say the main things are MLT and discipline. Honestly, that's what I'd say are like the two things.
So
Yeah.
I'm so excited that you said discipline, because I actually think discipline is one of the major keys to where I am today. And just having learned discipline in high school is where I felt I was the most disciplined, with the schedule being so crazy. And just because today it allows me to power through days when I actually don't feel like doing something. I'm like, nope, I know what it feels like to power through it. I know what it feels like on the other side. And it's been really crucial for me as well. So love that you brought that up. And then MLT, I know so many other amazing humans that went through the program and rave about it. What exactly was it about the program that was so helpful for you?
Yeah, so MLT, Management Leadership for Tomorrow, it's this overarching set of programs that are, at the end of the day, designed to get more Black folks, basically more BIPOCs, into positions of leadership within Fortune 500 companies. And so they have a series of programs, basically from college all the way to like mid-career. I wasn't aware of the college one back when I was in college, but I found out about the MBA prep one while I was in New York City. And I think the great thing about it was it kind of sped up the process of learning about business school. Is it right for you? What things do kind of admissions look for? What kind of path do you need to be on? What does your background need to be? What kind of things do you need to be clear about, at least at the time? And so it kind of, and also it made it very clear kind of what your trajectory for your GMAT needed to be as well. And so it kind of laid out the blueprint for what you need to do in order to be reasonably successful getting into business school. So that was amazing for me because the business schools that people in my family went to tend to be very local. University of Minnesota, Carlson, their business school was a popular one. My dad went there, and so did one of my cousins. And so really that was what I was aware of. And MLT was like, well, there are all these other ones, including the Harvards and Stanfords of the world. And actually at the beginning of MLT, there were folks, you could see kind of how long folks had been in this process. And also there was a wide range of aspirations. There were folks that were like, if I don't get into Stanford, I'm not going to business school. Yeah. I was like, wow, very impressive. And when I first joined, I was like, well, maybe I could get into a top 15 school. I really did not have the highest expectations.
Yeah.
And my coach, they assigned you this coach during the program. And my coach, I think her name was Coach Jackson, but she was a hard hitter for sure. She'll give it to you, give you the
Straight.
real. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I was talking to her about my physical aspirations, and she's like, I don't know, I don't think you're setting your sights high enough. And I was like, oh, she's like, I'm not saying that it's a shoe in, but like, you should try for these
Yeah.
schools. And I was like, okay, well, sure. But no one really ever said that to me. Like, you could try to go to Harvard, you could try to go to Stanford. So,
Hmm.
um, yeah, so that kind of opened my eyes with that too. But I think again, it's MLT plus the discipline,
Yeah.
and MLT certainly provides the blueprint, but there's a lot of work that you need to do on top of your regular job. Right, you're working 50 hours a week, then you need to turn around and do all this business school stuff. If you're not consistent, your results will show that. And for me, there was a period for the GMAT. I think I spent like 2 or 3 hours every day for 2 months studying, and on top of
While
that,
keeping a full-time job.
exactly. And as a sales engineer, I had to go to different customers around the city. And
Yeah.
so I'd have travel days
Wait, you were in New
where
York this time, at this point?
yes, still in New
I
York.
was
Yeah.
in New York too. I remember,
Oh,
Kaita, I'd
really?
wake up, I think, at 4. I had this thing where I had a visa. My visa was expiring. I was on the TPS, like the immigration visa
Oh,
from Sierra
yeah.
Leone because of Ebola, and it was
Yeah. Oh,
expiring. And so I
wow.
was like, I was applying round 3, and I had a month to study for the team. And I was like, oh my god, I gotta get my shit together.
Oh, my
And
God. That's
so
so
I was like, oh my
stressful.
god, I'm gonna apply to business school now. I was gonna apply next year. And so for this month, Kaita, I was waking up at 4 a.m. I would practice questions, and then I decided I'm going to sign up for a half marathon just to keep me disciplined. And I'd go for a run, and then I'd go into working at consulting hours. And then I come to sleep,
Oh,
pass out, wake up again. So I so resonate with the discipline and holding a full-time job. And the other thing I will say is, for not everyone's a good test taker, right? And I certainly don't, I'm not an amazing test taker from the get-go. And so I think just not taking that personally, your first score, and just practice the questions, and you will get better. The more you see it, the more you understand the patterns. And yeah, and
yeah.
so I love your story.
That story sounds like the story we should be talking about. That's insane. Oh my gosh, that
Love
sounds
it.
like a movie. I
I
had 1 month.
remember, but I also remember I was so tired in the. I remember one morning I was just so tired. I was like, I can't do this today. And I remember like
Yeah.
literally crawling out of bed, like
Oh
falling on the
my.
carpet, being like, no, I'm gonna do this. I came all the way from Sierra Leone. I just got to practice and study for the next month. You got it.
I
And
need
in a
both of you to
way,
hear this story.
in a way, having like this, I could see the end in sight. I was like, okay, we can do it. All right, love it. And we met at GSB, and one of my first memories of you were this super positive, bright-eyed, very happy guy. You loved engineering. I think you were working on a project, maybe in the engineering school. Maybe you were taking a course. You were telling me about it, and then you were like, "I love surfing. I came here to surf. I'm going to learn how to surf."
Whoops.
Do you remember this? And I
I
was
don't remember
like,
saying
"Oh
I
my
came here to
gosh."
surf, but I believe
No,
it.
no, no. But you came to California and you're like, one of my goals while I'm in California is I'm going to learn how to surf. And I loved it. And I also wanted to learn how to surf. And I think maybe you invited me one time and maybe we went, but then another time I couldn't make it. And you were like, I admired your dedication and again, discipline to the surfing pursuit. And today, you know how great a surfer I am, which is not at all.
Priorities. Great podcaster though. So yeah,
But let's talk about your GSB experience. And I want to hear what's like, how do we maximize the GSB experience from your standpoint? And then also what are the ways to screw it up? Let's start with how to maximize the GSB experience or the
yeah, no,
MBA
that's
experience in general.
yeah, it's a great question, and it's crazy to think that we graduated like 4 years ago,
Almost 5 years
or
ago,
plus.
4 years ago.
Yeah.
But hey, I think COVID really warped time because it really
Yes.
doesn't feel like
Unfair.
Years.
Very
Yeah.
unfair. Everyone's like, "Wow, you're already 5 years out." I was like, "Oh God."
I know exactly my reaction. Exactly. I'm like,
Yeah.
really? I feel like we just finished.
Seriously. But yeah, it's a great prompt, and I feel like my advice on this changes pretty significantly year to year as like my relationships with our classmates and professors change. Um, and also like it gets farther away, it gets rosier a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
But I
It's like,
think
oh, but that was a really nice, easy time. The further
exactly,
away.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, looking back, like, and my wife makes sure to let me know about this too. Like, I was busy, and so like one thing I would say is it's probably important to come up for air every once in a
Hmm.
while. And I don't mean like, oh, make sure that you go on a trip with your classmates, every once in a while. I mean, that's like part of the experience, right? Like going on the trips, the classes, the projects, the connections, like that's all part of the experience. But every once in a while, you should really come up for air and kind of ground yourself. Um, I think that allows you to kind of prioritize your time in the right way rather than kind of getting stuck in patterns, which I think is very easy to do in business school, and just like remind yourself of what's important to you, what are you trying to get out of it. And so I wish I'd done more of that actually to make the most of it. And then a couple other things I would say really lean into what interests you. Um, this is definitely something I did, as you mentioned, with the Kaito loves hardware and he's working on a
Surfing.
project at surfing. For me, I come from a hardware background, and so now I'm really working on hardware, software, and ML applications. But at the time, I was pretty dead set on it had to incorporate hardware
You
to some
got to
degree.
keep
And
your
so,
job, remember?
exactly, exactly.
Like,
This is
yo,
my
I won't
yeah.
keep a job if it's not hardware.
Oh, okay, I got to bring it up to my therapist. Thank you. You're like, I think she got it. I think she got it. But I definitely think there's leaning into what you're good at, but then I think there's also this leaning into what interests you. And I really think, obviously, you should spend some time with the former, but really lean into what interests you. And so for me, I actually am interested in hardware. And so there was a group at the time called Product Design and Manufacturing Club. Um, Ended up being kind of like a splice of hardware products as well as product management. But it ended up being the perfect club for me. Ended up being one of the co-leaders and made a ton of great connections in the Bay Area. And as a result of that, I have these connections to VCs that are actually interested in hardware, which, believe it or not, they do exist. And so, just kind of leaning into what you're interested in will yield
Mhm.
lots of dividends 5, 10 years down the line. And then I would say being intentional about building relationships with those you connect with. And for some folks, this may feel obvious, but for me personally, I've never been great with maintaining and keeping up with friendships. A lot of times I tend to be more passive, and if I'm in the moment with them, I'm having a blast, we're talking, but it's hard for me to be intentional about maintaining and building those relationships. And I think that's a really important piece of business school to really, with those people that you have that natural connection with, keeping up with them, right? I feel like half of the class at some point or another said to me, like, I wish there was a classmate CRM. Like, this is a way to like track folks and make sure
Yeah.
to connect with folks. But I think it's so important. I never actually used one of those, but I think just making sure you're intentional about building those relationships is really important.
Yeah, I love it. I think we're humans, we're social, and you never get anywhere by yourself. You always get to anywhere that's meaningful and worthwhile with others, be your partner, your family, or your friends and your community. And they just add so much more value and meaning to life and give it all the color. So I wholeheartedly agree with that. Connecting with your classmates, connecting with professors, love it. How about how to totally mess up, screw up, waste your MBA experience? Top tips here.
Absolutely. Well, I would say, it's funny, I just had a recent conversation about this, but I think depending on your school, there might be a different ethos around the coursework, right? And I think during our class, there was there were elements of this, and I think it's grown more pronounced over the years. But I think one way to screw it up is by doing the bare minimum in classes. And I recognize that everybody has different things they're trying to get out of the MBA. But these classes are actually pretty critical, not like actually being engaged. not only does it help you kind of refine your thinking and how you approach things with some of the sharpest minds of your generation, but also it allows for you to actually take in this material and apply it in the future. And a lot of this material, while some of it feels straightforward, some of it's actually pretty nuanced. And I've seen things from my strategy class or things from the product management class from Rob Siegel show up in my day to
Yeah.
day job.
Shout out Rob
And
Siegel.
seriously, and just met up with him actually, I think last
He's
maybe
great.
3 weeks ago. Yeah, fantastic. But kind of investing in those classes is going to yield results that you may not see in the short term. You may think you know everything or know quite a bit about this, but over the medium term, long term, I think you'll see a lot of yield from that. And one class where I wish I had done more than the bare minimum was the entrepreneurial finance class.
Hmm.
I swear I've learned cap tables like 4 times now. And if
Yeah.
you ask me to break it down, I still would not be able to fully communicate it to you. So I think that's an
I just
example of
asked
something
Machin
where
to keep breaking it down for me. I've outsourced that into his head.
and I do want to learn
But
from you
it's
because I
true.
feel like your outsourcing / delegation strategy is pretty
It's great,
on
right?
point. Yes.
I'm like, I'm gonna lead into my strengths
Please run a
and lead
clinic
into
on
his
that.
strengths.
Yes, yes. It's on our strengths.
Right.
Everyone's strengths, right? Absolutely.
Right. I love it.
Um,
Great
yeah,
advice.
yeah.
The
But I would
one
say that's the
thing,
key. Yeah.
yeah, one thing I heard from, I was hanging out with some GSPers from some years below us, and they had a great example that I want to share, which is just don't have, I think lots of people also are scared of dating within their class, but they pointed out to me that when it becomes an issue is when you do it and you're a horrible person to that person that you date, because
Mhm.
then this becomes your class and you know these people for forever. So that's another way to screw up your MBA experience. Don't do it, kids.
I love that. Treat it
Um,
like you're on The Bachelor. Yeah. The camera is on you. Yes, that
it's
makes a lot of
always
sense.
on. uh, no, yeah. And then just to echo back, I think what's been super interesting to me has been friends and these friendships. There are different periods in life where at some points you're closer with some friends and then not, and closer again. There's been other friends who I knew maybe a little bit and now have gotten to know so much better. And so it's such a wonderful place to just build on friendships. And I heard this a lot during the MBA experience of lifelong friends, but I'm really, it's like, wow, these are truly lifelong friends because
Yeah.
look at you. I admire you so much and I get to learn from you. I get to learn from Marcin. I get to learn from so many of our other friends. And it's pretty incredible in a way that I'm only getting to understand the benefits of the more out of business school I am.
Yeah. And I feel like because Stanford promoted this more of a deeper friendship, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think that's made these friendships with key classmates like really unique relative to
Yeah.
other friendships I have where now I try to retroactively bring that to my friendships
Yeah.
with some varying degrees of
Yeah.
success.
And they're like,
But
wait, why are you asking me
yeah,
such deep questions? What's wrong
you're
with
being
you?
strange. You're
Exactly.
being very strange.
Stop being weird.
Yes. I'm like, well, you have to understand. They're like, no, I don't want to do
You should
that.
gift them Connect, the book.
I think they would
Maybe.
block me.
Yeah. Love
We'll
it.
try it. Yeah.
There, yeah, you gotta also wait for the other person to be open to all of this stuff, you know.
Absolutely.
Okay. So then I want to transition to your post business school experiences in product management. And again, I love, love, love. You started PM Wild Black as a resource for people of color to understand what the landscape looks like in product management and what different paths exist to getting in. And also just being able to talk to other product managers, which you mentioned earlier is wildly inaccessible, especially when you don't know anyone in the space. So tell me a little bit about PM Wild Black, why you started it before I ask you more about your Google and Cruise experiences in PM.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the time that I started thinking about PML Black, I had been a PM for nearly like a year and a half. So I hadn't been a PM for very long. But similar to the rationale for Black surfers, didn't see many Black product
Yeah.
managers um, at Google or outside of Google. And so for me, that was kind of just nagging at my brain. And what I realized was product management, even hearing my story, it's this kind of this winding path that doesn't have a blueprint like it does to get into business school. It's a little bit more gray. And when a path is not clear, it tends to be more relationship driven. And when things tend to be more relationship driven, more who you know, representation tends to suffer. And so this is something I noticed in product management. It's also true in a lot of other fields and pursuits. And so for me, it was maybe like November of 2019 where I was like, what if I could kind of do what MLT did for me for product management? What if I could create a blueprint? Because the more I've done more product management, I have this like nagging belief that almost everything that we all think is kind of like a just go with your gut or just feel it out actually could be, maybe this is the engineer in me, but I actually feel like most things can be broken down into a series of steps, like a
And
decision tree.
processes, yeah.
And
Define the
I think it's
parameters. What are the unknowns? How do you mitigate the
absolutely,
risks?
absolutely, yeah, speaking my language. So you're like, gotcha. But that, I feel like that applies to like everything, honestly.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, for product management, it can't be much different. And so I started thinking about it. I actually created a PRD for PM All Black and what communities I wanted to target, and actually leveraged some of my classmates' insights as well, other product managers, to give me feedback on the PRD, which was great. Um, a bunch of folks, but I think Survey was in there, Lee,
Shout
Pradeep
out to all these
maybe,
classmates.
yes, many others that gave me feedback on the PRD, and started building the website. Wanted to get in some kind of key building block articles that I knew were going to help people really make a
Right.
step function change in their trajectory. And I actually launched the week of the George Floyd murder in
Mm-hmm.
Minneapolis, where I'm from. So it was just crazy timing. And by the way, PRD is a product requirements document. Basically, just list out kind of the vision for the product, what problem you're trying to solve, the solution you have in mind, and what are those like most must-have requirements, the nice-to-haves, etc. But I launched the website that same week, and so that was insane
Mm-hmm.
because I was so excited about the website. I posted it on LinkedIn. I asked folks to share it on LinkedIn, and then I'm also dealing with this really cut to
Yourself.
the bone feeling in my hometown, in my home state, uh, and it just made this feeling of like I need to go 110% on PML Black that much stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And so over that time period, it was very emotional, right? And I'm sure a lot of
Yeah,
viewers
for
can
all of
attest to
us.
that too, right?
Yeah.
And but it was also I felt like I had so much purpose, and I was bringing that energy to Google. That's why we actually created the what was it called, the Google Storefront Kit for
Mm.
small and medium Black-owned businesses, where we shipped out kits of products to Black-owned businesses. So shout out to Vernon Anderson, who I collaborated with, and Ashley Reese at Google. I think they're still continuing the program actually, which is great. And then also I was driving with PM All Black and posting as many articles as I could write. So I just had this energy, this anger, honestly,
Yeah.
over what happened. Um, so PM All Black right now, this is actually an interesting thing. It's the first project that was doing well that I actually turned down into maintenance mode. So happy to speak about that too. But basically,
Yeah.
what I realized was I like product management, but in terms of where my passion, like true, like what gets me up in the morning, what gets me like truly going, it's not necessarily this function. It's
Mm-hmm.
the stuff that I work on, and part of that is also Black surfers, right? I'm using product management as a guiding function to how I think about the features of the community. But I'm in love with surfing, so that's where I was like, I don't want to spend more of my spare time on surfing. Yeah.
Love it. Thank you for sharing that backstory on starting PM Wild Black. Before we continue, I want to talk about what you said and just highlight how amazing it is to be able to channel these feelings into productivity, something productive, something that's good for the community. I remember we were in New York City. We were part of these protests. And I know everyone listening can remember where they were. It was such a visceral feeling around the country. And it's wonderful that you're able to channel that into something that's beneficial for the community. Before we move on to Black surfers, I know we have tips for folks that want to get into PM. First of all, everyone should go check out Kaita's Medium article, his PRD on PM while Black, for tips on what paths to take depending on your experience. But I know you have a couple of other suggestions for folks that are looking to get into PM that may not necessarily know the way that I'd love us to share with listeners.
Absolutely. Yeah. So thanks for shouting out the article. Yeah, the paths to PM tends to be a pretty solid one. Even without me promoting the site, that tends to be the most read article. I think I get like 200 hits a month or something just on that
Which just
article.
shows how useful it is.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's sad that that didn't exist before. Like that just feels like, again, there should be a blueprint for these things.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, outside of that article, I would say it's really important to assess your situation honestly. Um, Sometimes folks will come to me and it'll feel very apparent that they haven't done the self inventory to understand their situation. Thinking about things like what kind of as you read about product management, what things are you meeting? Where what things are a gap, right? As you look at the skills and the knowledge that you need to have, a lot of times folks are thinking, "Well, I'm interested in product management, so tell me how to become a product manager." But I think it's important to kind of look at just a few articles on Google, right, of what product managers tend to do, and understand, where are you exceeding, where are you meeting expectations, and where do you have gaps, right? So I feel like that's the first step.
Mhm.
And then the second piece is really leverage the expertise you have. So if you're studying computer science in undergrad, probably the easiest thing, as long as you've done a few software engineering internships. That's kind of your expertise. Leverage that in product management and maybe join like a rotation program, right? Um, if you've been working for some time, maybe you've been working in the real estate space or you've been working at a SaaS company doing some sort of business or operations role, think about how can you leverage that expertise and make a case that you could be a really strong product manager in that area, right? If you're really knowledgeable about maybe you work at Compass and you're in business development and you're thinking about how do you expand the platform and giving that feedback to the folks building, that's product management, right? And so how do you leverage that to go to another real estate company and potentially become a product manager there? So leverage the expertise you have. The hardest thing to do is to have multiple degrees of separation between you and this product management role that you're interested in. So, like someone working in CPG in business that wants to become a PM at Google, that's going to be a very challenging jump, right? Without
Right.
something in between to kind of
Hmm.
facilitate that. And then I think the third thing, and this is still the case, and of course, in the long term, I'd love for this to be less of a factor. But I think the third piece is really to network.
Yeah.
And when I say network, uh, I think a lot of folks have different ideas of what that means. And when I'm saying network in this context, because there are people that come to me on LinkedIn with different versions of what they think networking is, and they have different levels of success. The folks that network with me successfully are folks that leverage a relationship that I have with them. So maybe they know that I've worked with them and seen their work, or there's someone that can vouch for them ahead of time. Those tend to be the best networking opportunities because I'm much more inclined to say, hey, actually, let me spend time with you. Let me figure out how I can help you get to where you're going. So that's like one piece. The other piece is there value you can provide to the person that you're trying to network with, right? So there are folks that have written articles on PML Black. Some folks who are product managers, some folks not. And for those folks that are not, if they reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm also thinking about product management. Like, is there something you could do to help me?" I would, bend over backwards to help those people.
Hmm.
So those tend to be the approaches I find that really work really well. The cold reach out is probably not going to work as well, I would say. Um, but one other plug I would make is for blackpms.com, which is this group, and I think they're a full entity. They've got a board, and they've created this pretty significant Slack community to connect Black PMs and aspiring Black PMs to each other, and they're trying to again lay out that blueprint, which I love, and connect people with mentors, etc. So if you're Black, if you want to
That's
be a product
wonderful.
manager, I would check out blackpms.com and join that community.
Amazing. And then really quickly, 3 tips for PM interview prep. I know you had these. Practice, the other two.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely practice, 100%. I think I would mention like there's books and there's live interviews you can do, but the key is just doing the reps of the interviews, which I think again ties back to what we were talking about with discipline.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the first thing is definitely reading a few books. I actually really love the Cracking the PM interview and Cracking the PM career books. I wasn't aware of the Cracking the PM career book until last year, but I actually argue that it's once you get like the baseline interview structure down from Cracking the PM interview, it's actually a better idea to spend more time in Cracking the PM career book, because that book actually lays out what you do as a PM, and you should be doing that exact thing in the interview. So I would actually recommend spend a little bit of time on the interview book and then spend a lot of time on the career book. The second thing I'll make a plug for is real mock interviews with a person. And there's some good platforms for that, Exponent, some other ones online, but basically allowing you to actually do interviews with folks and get feedback. But again, going back to discipline, it's that practice. If you do 3 interviews, the chance of you getting that job versus 30 or 10 or 20 interviews is going to be a huge difference. So I'd highly recommend practicing.
Really helpful, Kayiita. Thank you. So now let's transition to Black surfers. You've built the largest community of Black surfers. This is wild. Coming from me meeting this guy who was very excited about hardware and surfing at the GSB to now he's built the largest community of Black surfers. And I know you've won various awards and you are killing it. And it's so lovely to see. So definitely check it out if you haven't yet. Let's talk about what you mentioned earlier of you paused PM Wild Black to focus on Black surfers because you were more passionate about doing this. Love hearing that you followed your passion here. Tell me more about it.
Yeah, so I think this was maybe back in 2021. So that means that PML Black had been going for over a year and a half. And, my wife, Saran, was like instrumental for this conversation. But I've always tended to be, I don't want to say busybody, but that's really the word that comes to mind. I tend to like to busy myself, and I imagine for productive things.
Did you get it from your mom? Because that's a
I don't
phrase we
know.
use in
Sounds
Sierra
like
Leone, and
it.
I haven't heard it in the US. It's like an African phrase. You're too
Oh,
busybody.
really?
Yeah,
No
yeah.
way. Oh,
It's like
okay. Yeah.
Creole. You're too busybody. Okay, cool. So
Oh,
you're
wow.
busy. You. So
Yes,
Saran
I am.
helped.
I still am. Yeah, it's okay. It is a present tense state. Yes, but yeah. So I was incredibly busy. We were also engaged. We were planning for a wedding, so it's like wedding planning, PM All Black, Black Surfers, my job, um, and also trying to surf, which takes
Yeah.
too much time. And so I was really running ragged. And we had a heart to heart, and to her credit, she never really tells me what to do, but gives me some solid guidance. And I
I feel
realized
like
after that
Matcha needs to
conversation.
speak up right now and talk about how I do the same. He's also a busybody, and always his plate is too full.
Make sure he drops the comment in the YouTube. Yeah. Yeah. After that conversation, I realized I was like, okay, like it's a great problem to have. First of all, for things that you're working on to have good signal, right? I had companies reaching out to me, folks saying, I love these posts, please keep them coming. And then on Black Surfers, of course, similar things, folks saying, my child now wants to learn how to surf, and I've taught him how to surf. He never would have wanted to. I never would have thought to teach him if it wasn't for your platform. So good signal from these things. But for me, I had to check in with myself and think. I think the question I asked myself is like, in 5 years, if I continue down this path and let's say I hit this outcome with this project, will I be fulfilled? Will I be happy? And what I realized is that with PML Black, though I would be fulfilled by the impact I would have made, I'm sure lots of folks, even more folks than what I've already impacted, would become product managers, and that would be great. I realized I wouldn't be truly happy because it's just not that core passion for me. And so when I thought about that for Black Surfers, and I thought about in 5 years what that might look like, would I be happy? Would I be fulfilled? And my answer was yes, definitely. And so that's when I realized, okay, I need to figure out a way to. I'm not shutting it down, so I'm still paying the fee for a month because I know that it's still,
It's useful.
there's still content. I should probably have someone else, like, this is
Run
the
it.
delegation I still need to learn from you. Like, I know there's probably someone else out there that would be super motivated to run with that, and I'm like, you should grow that because I want the impact to grow. But so I just have that in maintenance mode, and then really, throwing a lot of effort towards black surfers, and
That's
I am
amazing.
feeling much more fulfilled and happier as a result. So
Yeah, and I'm sure you're able to give more of yourself to the project, and that makes you feel great, gives you more energy that you can circle back to your world and your life and your family as
exactly,
well.
filling the cup, absolutely.
Yes, you can only give to others if your cup is full and you have something to give. Amazing. What is your message to folks that are thinking of surfing, especially in the Black community, a little worried to try it? What would you tell them?
Yeah, that was a good question. So there tends to be like a few reasons why people are nervous or hesitant to do it. And so I'll respond to each one. So one of them is fear of the water, and that may be because of your own personal trauma or just knowing your own swimming skill set, whether you can't swim or very limited swimming. Second thing is tends to be sharks. um, and the third thing tends to be kind of just like it's cold, and especially up here in the Bay Area, that tends to be a common refrain. So for the first one, fear of the water, I want to 100% acknowledge that and like validate that, because for me growing up, again, every few years I was body surfing with my dad in SoCal. There was a time I got caught in a rip, and my dad was like, "You got to get to shore," and I was like, "Okay."
Right.
So I've had these experiences in the water, and I grew up swimming too, and so I recognize that that's a privileged state to be in. And so yeah, if I was told, "Hey, go do this activity in a thing that could kill you because you don't know how to navigate it," I would also be afraid. But what I would say is that there are some great teachers out there that really can handle you, bring you to the right places where you can still touch the bottom of the water, and they're trained in CPR, they're trained in all ocean safety, etc. Like, you will be fine with those accredited instructors, and so that's what I would say to the folks that are afraid of, I don't feel super comfortable in the water. We can bring you to the right place where you can still touch the bottom and still experience this joy of surfing. And then if you want to continue and start doing it a little bit more independently, yes, maybe you should also learn a little bit of swimming. The cool thing though about surfboards is that they're essentially a flotation device. So that's great. And they're connected
Yeah.
to your ankle via a pretty strong leash. So that's pretty good. And then on top of that, you tend to have to wear a wetsuit, at least in California. And that also acts as like a buoyancy aid. It's not full life jacket, but if I just stand vertically in the water, it'll make me float a little bit. So
Hmm.
you're actually in a pretty good spot. Um, and then for the second thing with the sharks, they're out there 100%. The chance of you getting attacked by a shark is so small. I think you have a higher chance of getting struck by lightning. And so with that, I would just say, for people always ask, "Are you thinking about sharks?" Absolutely. At certain times, if I'm by myself, but there are multiple reasons why you probably would never be the victim of a shark attack. One, they tend to feed at dawn and dusk. Your lesson probably is going to be during the day. Second thing is they tend to go after folks that emulate kind of like a wounded seal that's isolated. You're going to be with instructors and probably multiple classmates, and so again, you're going to be fine. And then you're also probably going to be closer to shore as you're learning to surf. So just the chance of you getting attacked is so small, even smaller than the chance of getting hit by lightning. So uh, yeah, I would rest easy on that. And then the third thing, the water is cold. The water is cold, but you know what? We've got wetsuits.
And you
these
warm up while you're surfing.
and you're exercising, so your muscles are burning calories, and that's generating heat. Absolutely. And then what's better than being in the snow or being in the cold and then going inside and getting a hot chocolate? I mean, come on. So you
Oh
can do
my
the same thing with surfing. It's a great feeling.
goodness.
So you should definitely come into the water. It'll be a blast. Join the community. Get started. It'll be fun.
Spoken like a true surf coach. Before we end, I want to ask you a question. You've had such a cool journey, love your journey. What are some of the biggest challenges or biggest challenge you feel you've faced in your journey? And for each person, that's different. And how did you power through it?
Yeah, power hour.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was thinking about this, and I think the biggest challenge I share here is really something that happened a year and a half into my time at Google. So, I came out of business school. I'd done an internship at Google during business school, and so I was all fired up. I got in the job. I'm like, all right, this is the product that kind of you're going to be working on. It's already kind of started. The initial concept is carved out, and now we just need more refinements, more hardware trade-offs and decisions. And I was like super excited about that. So really went full steam on that for how long? Like at least like 13 months. And probably in the last like 4 to 5 months, there started to be questions of, is this the right product for us to build? And for me, I was so blinders up, not actually thinking about the broader strategy. In my head, I was like,
Yeah.
this is the product I'm working on. I want to launch a product. And
Right.
so I'm going to do what it takes to make this product happen. So I'd been through every logical leap I
Yeah.
needed to get through. And I was like, nope, this makes a lot of sense. In reality, I was so wedded to the outcome
Yeah.
that I didn't stop to be present and think, okay, what makes sense here? And so um, at a certain point during that process, they did decide to actually, they basically canceled that product, basically. And so that was heartbreaking for me and as well as for the team. And, I was even in those conversations where we were like, what should we do with this product? And one of the options was, cancel the product. And I felt so much emotion around it. I was so attached to the success of the product, the launch of the product, that when it canceled, I was heartbroken. And I really had to do some soul searching. Like, wow, this really impacted me, right? And I think there were a few lessons there for me. One was, you know, who you are does not equal the things that you're outputting. And I think for me, for a long time, that was like how I operated. It was, I'm doing this, I'm getting these grades, I'm going to this school, I am this person. Whereas versus saying, I am this person, I also do these other things, but like that is actually not who I am, right? And so that was a huge learning for me
That
because
is
at the
really
time
profound.
it was like direct attribution. um, and the other piece of it was, you know, when you're able to do that and kind of separate yourself. And actually, one of my former managers, Prabhu, he was telling me about this. It's like as a product manager, really this goes for any function. You need to be able to separate yourself from the product and try to look at it objectively. And that's the only way you're going to kind of make the right decisions versus, and there's a certain level of passion you need to have about it, right? Like you need to be so passionate about Power Hour. I need to be so passionate
Hmm.
about Black Surfers. We also sometimes need to take that step back and think about, okay, what really makes the most sense here? That's part of the reason why I was able to then do what I did with PM All Black and put it into maintenance mode, right? And so luckily for me, it was probably like 4 months into my roles that I also got assigned another project. And at the time, they were like, essentially, we know we want to launch something at this time, but we don't know really what it is. And so I got to work on that really from beginning to end. And we actually did end up launching that. But what was great about that experience, and I got lucky, but what was great about that experience was uh, I kind of took those learnings from that canceled product and applied it to this product, where there were multiple times in that product where, again, it kind of went on the chopping block. Like, hey, does this really make sense? And at that time, I actually had taken those learnings from the canceled product, and I was like, okay, let's think about this objectively. Like, what would it mean for the business? What would it mean for our users? What would it mean for, our trajectory in this space against our competition? And I was able to look at it much more objectively. I was tapped to be in much more of those executive forums as a result because of those learnings
Maturity.
I had from the exactly maturity. That's what it is. And so, yeah, that was definitely huge learning experience. Like, and I'm so deeply appreciative of Google for giving me that opportunity actually to learn because pre-business school, when I was working with all those hardware startups, I had seen lots of product cancellations, but it's not that I didn't care. It's that I wasn't as emotionally attached to them because I was responsible for 50 products because
Hmm.
there were so many hardware startups. So it's like, oh, you guys canceled? Like, oh no. But I have these other ones that I need to
Yeah.
sell chips to. So, but for me to be working on one thing, one or two things, and have one of those be taken away from you, it's hard. So it was a big learning for me. But it was exciting to launch that second product. It was the Nest Hub second generation and with sleep
Yeah.
sensing and got to
Very cool
speak to
product.
reporters and all that. So that was an awesome experience. Yeah.
That's such a great story that you shared, and want to make sure the folks remember pieces here. One, you needed to take a step back and be more objective. And you mentioned you had your blinders on. And I think that's something that we all do. It's very normal when you get invested in something to really want it to work out. And just being able to take a breather, a step back, and be open to more possibilities and understand that longer term, this might not actually work well. And being open to that then led you to this other product where you could bring those lessons in and be an even better product manager for your team, for the product, for the company. So wonderful. And that doesn't always happen in succession. I agree. I think you were lucky there.
Yeah,
But I think we learn so much more from our quote unquote failures than we do from our successes. Because a lot of the times with our successes, we just end up being a bit lucky. And with the failures, you learn all the ways things can go wrong, and you tend to be a stronger person with more perspective, just given the experience that you had.
I love that.
Okay, and then let's end and lift us back up. What are you really excited about these days, Kayiita? I know you're working on a really cool project.
Absolutely. So I've been at Cruise for a year and a half now, which is crazy.
Time flies when
Time
you're having
flies.
fun.
Absolutely. Did we all just have lived the same lives? We all have the
No,
same
honestly,
sayings.
2020 to now is a blur.
Seriously. But yeah, a year and a half, and I've been working on the origin. I think what's really cool about Cruise is that we're working on this crazy thing, but I can also speak about it pretty openly because we talk about it pretty openly. So working on this product called the Origin, which is really this vehicle built from the grounds up with GM, with General Motors, to be self-driving. So no steering wheel, campfire seating, lots of space, yet a compact car as well. And so really excited to see that land on the streets of San Francisco in 2023. So I know, Jen, we tried to get you into the Bolts in Austin. Hopefully, give a
Yes,
ride pretty soon. But
I can't wait. I will
yes,
record that, and then I'm going to get you on
absolutely,
the pod again next year once the Origin launches, and we can talk about
absolutely.
your experience building it. And I'm so excited for that.
Yeah, I'll
But
definitely get you in a ride when you come to San Francisco in 2023 for
yeah,
sure.
but how cool also just looking at your journey from hardware to PM to a one product that got canceled to Nest Hub, which has been touched so many lives, to now you're building Origin, and that's going to go live 2023. When? Do we have an approximate month?
I don't think I'll be able to share that, but
Okay.
2023, yes,
No worries. We'll be
yeah,
waiting very patiently or impatiently.
good.
Amazing. Kayiita, this was lovely. I loved having you on. I want to have you on again. And thank you so much for super, super helpful tips.
Thank you, Jen. This was great.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like what you hear, leave a review and share.